When my son Alex told me I was an embarrassment to his new billionaire lifestyle, I believed him. After all, what did I know? I was just the single mother who worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night, to scrape together the money for his coding boot camp. I packed my single suitcase that night, my hands shaking as I folded the same 3 dresses I'd worn to every one of his childhood school events. I left his guest house without a word, thinking I was finally doing something right by disappearing from his perfect new world. But just 7 days later, he was on my doorstep. Not with an apology. No, that would come later, and it would cost him dearly. He arrived with a panic in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was 12 years old, standing in our tiny kitchen, sobbing because he'd accidentally deleted his first program. He was about to learn that every glitch in the system has a root cause, and I was the only one who knew how to debug this particular problem. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, discarded, or underestimated by the very people you sacrificed everything for, then hit that subscribe button right now, because I'm about to tell you how I went from being a discarded mother to the woman holding the master key to a $137 million empire. My name is Helen Walsh, and for 25 years my entire world revolved around my son Alex. When he sold his tech startup for $137 million, I wept with pride. Not because of the money, though God knows we'd never had any, but because my quiet, brilliant boy had finally gotten the recognition he deserved. He moved me into the guest house on his new estate, promising me I'd never have to worry about anything ever again. I should have known that the worry was just beginning. Sometimes the people closest to you can become strangers faster than you ever thought possible, and sometimes the very success you helped build becomes the weapon they use to destroy you. Let me take you back to the beginning, when Alex and I were a team of 2 against the world. I was 19 when I had him, barely more than a child myself, but his father disappeared the moment he heard the word pregnant, so it became Helen and Alex against everything life could throw at us. And believe me, life threw plenty. I worked 2 jobs from the time Alex was 6 months old. Days I waitressed at Murphy's Diner, smiling through the exhaustion while truckers and construction workers left dollar tips on $15 tabs. Nights, after putting Alex to bed, I cleaned offices downtown until 3 in the morning, my hands raw from industrial cleaning chemicals, my back aching from bending over desks and emptying trash cans for people who never saw my face. But Alex? My God, that boy was special from the very beginning. While other kids were playing with toys, he was taking apart our old radio, trying to understand how the voices got inside. By age 8, he was teaching himself programming on a computer at the public library, staying there every day after school until closing time. The librarian, Mrs. Garrett, used to call me at the diner. "Helen," she'd say, "you need to see what your boy is doing. He's building something magical." When Alex turned 14, he asked me for something I couldn't afford. A laptop of his own. Not a toy, not a game system, but a real computer, where he could build the programs dancing in his head. I sold my car that week, the only thing of value I owned. For 3 months, I took 2 buses and walked 4 miles every day to get between my jobs. My feet were covered in blisters, and I'd collapse into bed at 4 a.m., but watching Alex's face light up when he first opened that laptop made every aching step worth it. By the time he was 19, Alex had taught himself more about computers than most college graduates ever learn. But he needed formal training, credentials that would open doors his brilliant mind deserved to walk through. The coding boot camp cost $8,000, more money than I'd ever had at one time in my life. I worked double shifts for 6 months, picking up every extra hour I could find, living on ramen noodles and coffee, sleeping 4 hours a night. We were partners in his dream. When he got his first programming job, making more in a month than I made in 3, he cried. Not from happiness, but from finally understanding what I had sacrificed to get him there. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to build something amazing, and when I do, you'll never have to worry about money again." That promise sustained me through everything that came after, until the day he decided I was too embarrassing to deserve it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was getting ready for my shift at the diner when Alex's voice came through my phone, shaking with excitement. I hadn't heard since he was a child. "Mom, sit down," he said. "I just sold TechFlow Solutions for $137 million. I dropped the phone. $137 million. My son, my brilliant, quiet son who used to fall asleep at our kitchen table with programming books as his pillow, was suddenly richer than I could comprehend. When I finally picked up the phone, I was sobbing so hard I couldn't speak, not because of the money, but because the world had finally recognized what I'd always known. Alex Walsh was extraordinary. The changes started immediately, and they were subtle enough that I told myself they were just adjustments to a new reality. Alex, who had always been Alex, who signed his early programs A. Walsh in careful, modest letters, suddenly became Alexander. His business cards, his email signature, even the way he introduced himself to waiters changed. Alexander sounded successful, sophisticated, worthy of the fortune he'd earned. He bought a mansion in Riverside Hills, the kind of place we used to drive past when he was young, both of us staring at the iron gates and manicured lawns, wondering what kind of people lived behind them. "I want you to move in with me," he said, and my heart soared. But then came the clarification. "There's a guest house in the back. You'll have your own space, your own entrance, privacy." The guest house was beautiful, bigger than any place I'd ever lived, but it was separate, detached. When Alex gave me the keys, he said it was so I could have independence and dignity. What I heard was distance. What I felt was the first crack in a relationship I thought was unbreakable. I told myself it was temporary, that we were both adjusting to his new life. I had no idea I was watching my son disappear and a stranger named Alexander take his place. A stranger who would soon decide that his embarrassing mother had no place in his glittering new world. Chloe Ashworth entered Alex's life 3 months after the sale, arriving like a perfectly designed algorithm meant to optimize his new social status. She was everything I wasn't. 28 years old, Stanford MBA, family money that went back generations, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. The night Alex brought her to dinner, our first family meal in his new dining room, she studied me like I was a specimen under a microscope. While Alex proudly told her about my sacrifices, about the 2 jobs and the sold car and the coding boot camp, Chloe nodded with the kind of polite interest you'd show a child describing their crayon drawing. "How wonderfully authentic," she said when Alex finished his story. That word, authentic. The way she said it made it sound like a disease. She turned to me with that calculated smile. "Helen, you must be so proud that Alex has finally achieved a success he deserves. It's beautiful how he's taking care of you now, taking care of me, as if I were a pet he'd rescued, rather than the woman who'd made his success possible." But Alex beamed at her words, and I could see him seeing me through her eyes for the first time. Not as his partner in building dreams, but as evidence of where he'd come from, a reminder of a life he was eager to leave behind. Within weeks, Chloe was making helpful suggestions. "Helen, don't you think a retirement community would be more social for you? You could make friends your own age, participate in activities designed for your interests." She said it with the concerned tone of someone genuinely worried about my well-being, but her eyes held the satisfaction of someone moving chess pieces into position. The guest house, which had felt like independence, began to feel like exile. Dinner invitations became less frequent, then stopped entirely. When I asked Alex about it, he'd say, "Chloe and I have been so busy with business dinners and networking events. You understand, right, Mom? It's not really your kind of thing." Alex's new friends were carbon copies of Chloe. Polished, educated, speaking in acronyms about markets and ventures and opportunities. When they gathered at the house for what Alex called casual get-togethers, I was never mentioned on the invitation list, never included in the planning, never expected to participate. I tried to join them once, walking from the guest house to the main house during one of their poolside gatherings. The conversation stopped when I appeared. Not rudely, but with the uncomfortable silence of adults who'd been interrupted while discussing grown-up matters. Oh, Helen, Chloe said brightly. How nice to see you. We were just discussing cryptocurrency investment strategies. I don't suppose that's something that interests you? The assumption that I couldn't possibly understand, couldn't possibly contribute, was embedded in every interaction. When I mentioned that I'd been reading about Alex's industry, trying to understand his world, he'd smile indulgently. That's sweet, Mom, but this stuff is pretty complex. Why don't you focus on enjoying your retirement? Retirement? As if my life's work was finished at 62, as if the mind that had managed household finances through decades of poverty, that had researched every scholarship and opportunity for Alex, that had learned enough about computers to help him debug his early programs, was suddenly too simple for his new reality. The business dinners were the worst. These weren't casual gatherings, but formal affairs in his grand dining room, with investors and partners and people who might fund Alex's next venture. I would watch from my guest house window as cars with drivers pulled up, as men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses filed into what used to be our shared space. Once, I asked Alex if I could join them. It would mean so much to me to see you in your element, to understand this world you've built. He looked genuinely pained by the request. Mom, these people are... It's complicated. They have expectations about professionalism, about image. I can't afford to seem... He didn't finish the sentence, but I heard the words anyway. I can't afford to seem like someone whose mother was a waitress and a cleaning lady. The guest house began to feel like a beautiful prison. I had everything I needed. Cable television, a full kitchen, comfortable furniture, but I was living parallel to Alex's life rather than sharing it. I was the embarrassing secret he housed but never acknowledged, the inconvenient reminder of who he used to be before he became Alexander, the tech mogul who belonged in mansions and boardrooms. The launch party for Alex's new venture was supposed to be his crowning achievement. 200 of the most influential people in tech gathered in our backyard, his backyard, to celebrate the next phase of Alexander Walsh's brilliant career. For 3 days beforehand, event planners transformed the estate into something that belonged in architectural magazines. Against all precedent, Alex invited me, not as his guest exactly, but as someone who could stop by if I wanted to see the setup. Chloe's smile when he mentioned it was sharp enough to cut glass, but Alex seemed genuinely pleased to include me for once. Just for an hour, Mom. I'd like you to see what we've built. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for his college graduation, and spent an hour on my makeup, wanting to look like someone who belonged in his world, someone who wouldn't embarrass him. The party was magnificent. String quartet, champagne fountains, waiters in white gloves serving delicacies I couldn't pronounce. I was standing near a group of investors when one of them asked me how I felt about my son's success. My heart swelled with pride. "Oh, I'm so proud," I said. "Ever since he was little, working on that computer game of his." Well, I guess it's not a game anymore, but you know what I mean. I always knew he'd do something amazing. The silence was instant and complete. Computer game? I had called his revolutionary app, his cutting-edge platform that was going to transform how businesses managed workflow, a computer game. The investor's eyebrows rose. Someone nearby actually winced, but it was Alex's face that destroyed me. A look of pure venom, of complete mortification, as if I had stripped naked in front of his most important contacts. The conversation never recovered. The investor made polite excuses and walked away. Others followed. I stood there in my navy dress, the proud mother who had just humiliated her son in front of the people who controlled his future, and I understood that I had finally, irreversibly, proven exactly what Chloe had been saying all along. I didn't belong in Alexander's world. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alex's face, that look of pure disgust when I'd called his precious app a computer game. I kept telling myself it would be okay, that we'd laugh about it in the morning like we used to laugh about my technology mishaps when he was young. I was making coffee at 7 a.m. when I heard his footsteps on the guest house porch. But the man who walked through my door wasn't my son. This was Alexander Walsh, CEO, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months. His face was cold, businesslike, the expression he probably wore when firing employees or rejecting proposals. He didn't sit down, he didn't accept the coffee I offered. He stood in my tiny living room like he was delivering a boardroom presentation. "Mom," he said, and even that word sounded different in his mouth. Distant, formal. "We need to talk about last night." I started to apologize, to explain that I was just nervous, that I didn't mean to embarrass him, but he held up his hand like he was stopping traffic. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, and last night just confirmed what I already knew. You're holding me back." Holding him back. 25 years of sacrifice, of choosing his dreams over my own comfort, of working myself to exhaustion so he could succeed, and I was holding him back. "These people," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward where the party had been, "they don't understand our situation. They see you and they see where I came from, and it raises questions about whether I really belong in their circles." Then came the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about the boy I'd raised. "It's time you disappeared, Mom. I've arranged for you to receive a monthly allowance, enough to live comfortably somewhere else. You can visit Ruth, maybe find a nice apartment near her, but you can't stay here anymore." He paused, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been regret, but then it was gone. "I need you to be packed and gone by tomorrow evening. If you're not, I'll have security remove you." Security remove me? His own mother. I nodded because I couldn't trust my voice to speak. I nodded because the alternative, being dragged from the guest house by hired men while Alex watched, was too humiliating to contemplate. I nodded because, somewhere deep down, I believed he was right. Maybe I was an embarrassment. Maybe I didn't belong in his glittering world. Maybe the best thing I could do for the son I loved was to disappear. Ruth's spare room was 8 feet by 10 feet, barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser. My sister had tried to make it welcoming. Fresh sheets, a small vase of flowers from her garden, but it felt like a coffin from my former life. Everything I owned fit in 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. 62 years of living, reduced to what could fit in the back of Ruth's Honda Civic. 3 days before, I'd been living in a guest house with marble countertops and a walk-in shower. Now I was sharing a bathroom with Ruth's teenage granddaughter, who was polite but clearly uncomfortable having her great-aunt sleeping in what used to be her study space. The walls were thin, and I could hear every conversation, every phone call, every reminder that I was an intruder in someone else's life. Ruth tried to be supportive, bringing me tea and trying to start conversations about anything except Alex, but I could see the questions in her eyes, the same ones I was asking myself. How had I gotten it so wrong? How had 25 years of devotion led to being discarded like an outdated piece of furniture? Maybe Alex was right. Maybe I was just a relic from his past, too damaged by poverty and struggle to fit into his success story. I spent most of those first days staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the launch party, every sign I'd missed that my son was ashamed of me. The monthly allowance he'd promised arrived in my checking account, more money than I'd ever seen at once. But it felt like hush money, payment for my silence and absence from his perfect new life. It was Peter Kellerman who saved me, though I didn't know it at the time. Peter had been Alex's first business partner back in the garage days, before Chloe, before the mansion, when they were just 2 young programmers convinced they could change the world. I hadn't heard from him in years, so when his name appeared on my phone that Thursday morning, I almost didn't answer. "Helen," he said without preamble, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Back in the early days, when Alex was setting up the original company structure, did you ever sign any incorporation papers, official documents making you part of the business?" My mind went blank for a moment. Then, slowly, like a photograph developing, I remembered. Alex's tiny apartment, a card table covered with legal documents, his nervous excitement as he explained that he needed an adult to sign as a founding board member. It's just a formality, Mom. Legal requirement. You're not really involved, but I need your signature. Peter, I said, my heart starting to race, why are you asking me this? His voice was grim. Because if you did sign those papers, Alex might not own as much of his company as he thinks he does. The memory came flooding back like a dam bursting. It was 2003 and Alex was 22, working his first real programming job but dreaming of something bigger. He'd been spending weekends at Peter's garage, the two of them hunched over computers they'd built from spare parts, talking about algorithms and user interfaces in a language I barely understood, but found beautiful because of the passion in their voices. Alex had been so excited that Sunday afternoon when he called me over to Peter's place. Mom, we're doing it. We're actually starting our own company. But there's this legal thing. We need what they call a founding board structure to incorporate properly. He spread the papers across Peter's workbench next to oil stains and scattered screwdrivers, as if they were launching the next Microsoft right there between the lawnmower and paint cans. The lawyer says we need at least 3 founding board members for the corporate structure to work, Peter had explained, adjusting his glasses nervously. Alex and I are too, but we need a third, someone trustworthy, someone who believes in what we're building. They both looked at me with those hopeful young faces, and my heart melted. Of course I would help. Of course I would sign whatever papers would help my brilliant son achieve his dreams. I signed where they told me to sign, witnessed what they needed witnessed, asked no questions because I trusted them completely. It's just a formality, Mom, Alex had assured me, kissing my cheek. You're not really involved in the business side. We just need your signature for the legal paperwork. I was proud to be included, even in such a small way, in the foundation of what would become his empire. Helen, Peter said over the phone, his voice careful and precise, I need you to understand exactly what happened that day in my garage. When we set up Techful Solutions originally, we created what's called a founding board structure. You weren't just signing as a witness, you were signing as an actual founding board member with real legal standing in the company. But Peter, I don't know anything about running a business. I was just helping Alex with paperwork. He chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. That's exactly the point, Helen. The 3 of us were listed as equal founding board members, each holding what corporate law calls golden shares, special shares that give veto power over major corporate decisions, regardless of who owns what percentage of the regular stock. My head was spinning. But Alex sold the company. He owned it completely. That's what all the newspapers said. Peter's voice became more urgent. That's what Alex thinks too. Over the years, as the company grew and he brought in investors, he diluted the regular shares, bought out other stakeholders, consolidated ownership. But those original founding board positions, those golden shares, they never changed. They couldn't be changed without unanimous consent from all 3 founding board members. Peter, what are you telling me? My voice was barely a whisper. I'm telling you that Alex's big sale to Megatech Industries requires 100% ownership of the company to go through. But he doesn't have 100% ownership. He has about 97% of the regular shares and 2/3 of the founding board. You, Helen, still hold 1/3 of the founding board, which gives you veto power over any major sale or merger. The room started to spin. The son who had thrown me out for being an embarrassment, who had banished me from his perfect life because I didn't fit his image of success, didn't actually own his company outright. The waitress and cleaning lady he was so ashamed of held the key to his entire $137 million 0-cents deal. Peter, are you saying... I couldn't finish the sentence. I'm saying that without your signature on Megatech's acquisition documents, Alex's deal dies. The buyers require clean ownership to complete the purchase. They've done their due diligence and found the original incorporation papers. They know about your golden share, even if Alex forgot about it. After I hung up with Peter, I sat in Ruth's tiny spare room for 2 hours, staring at the wall, trying to process what I'd just learned. The papers Peter emailed me might as well have been written in ancient Greek for all I understood about corporate law, but the conclusion was clear. I wasn't just Alex's discarded mother anymore. I was the woman who could destroy his deal with a single word. The timeline was brutal in its irony. Megatech Industries had given Alex until Friday at 5 p.m. to provide clean documentation of 100% ownership. It was already Tuesday. He had 3 days to solve a problem he didn't even know existed. A problem that could only be solved by the woman he'd had removed from his property by threat of security. Peter connected me with Eleanor Martinez, a corporate attorney who specialized in exactly these kinds of ownership disputes. "Mrs. Walsh," she said after reviewing the documents, "you're in an extraordinarily powerful position. This isn't just about signing papers. You have legitimate grounds to negotiate terms for your consent. Your son needs you more than he's ever needed anyone in his life." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not from happiness, exactly, but from the profound shift in power dynamics. The embarrassing mother who didn't belong in Alexander's world was about to become the most important person in it. And this time, the terms of our relationship would be decided by me. The doorbell at Ruth's house rang at 2:47 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock, wondering how long it would take Alex to discover his problem and how much longer before he swallowed his pride enough to come begging. Through Ruth's front window, I saw him standing on the porch, and for a moment, I didn't recognize him. Gone was Alexander Walsh, the polished tech mogul who had dismissed me from his life 5 days earlier. This was Alex, my Alex, but broken in a way I'd never seen. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it compulsively. His face was pale, almost gray, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting panic. But it was his eyes that told the real story. They held the same desperate fear I'd seen when he was 12 and thought he'd ruined everything by accidentally deleting his first important program. The same panic from when he was 16 and worried he wouldn't get into any colleges. The same terror from when he was 22 and his first startup was failing. Every major crisis of his life had brought him to me eventually. But this time, I wasn't automatically on his side. I let him ring twice before I answered. When I opened Ruth's front door, he started talking immediately, the words tumbling out, like he'd rehearsed them during the drive over, but was too panicked to deliver them smoothly. "Mom, I'm so glad you're here. There's a problem with the Megatech deal, a legal complication nobody anticipated." I looked at my son, this man who had earned $137 million, 0 cents, who owned a mansion, who had thrown me out of his life like garbage, standing on my sister's modest porch, begging for help from the woman he'd called an embarrassment. "Hello, Alex," I said simply. "Would you like to come in and explain this problem to me?" For the first time in months, maybe years, I was completely calm while Alex was falling apart. The tables had turned so completely that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Alex followed me into Ruth's small living room, looking around at the modest furniture like he was seeing how the other half lived. He sat on the edge of the couch, his expensive shoes looking out of place on Ruth's old carpet. "Mom, the lawyers found some old paperwork from when Peter and I first incorporated TechFlow, some technicality about founding board members that's complicating the sale." I let him continue his carefully worded explanation, watching as he tried to minimize what he surely knew was a catastrophic problem. "They're saying there might be some question about complete ownership transfer, something about signatures from original board members. I know it's confusing, but I was hoping you might remember signing some papers back then." I walked to Ruth's kitchen table where I'd spread out the documents Eleanor had sent me and picked up the stack of papers. Alex's eyes followed my movement, and I saw the exact moment when he recognized what I was holding. His face went from pale to completely white. "You mean this paperwork, Alex?" I asked, turning to face him with the incorporation documents in my hands. "The paperwork that says you don't actually own 100% of TechFlow Solutions? The paperwork that shows your embarrassing mother is a founding board member with veto power over any major sale?" He stood up so quickly he almost knocked over Ruth's coffee table. "Mom, I can explain." But I held up my hand, the same gesture he'd used to silence me in the guest house. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Let me save you some time," I said, settling into Ruth's recliner like it was a throne. "Your lawyers have discovered that Megatech Industries can't complete their acquisition without signatures from all founding board members. Peter already signed. You've signed. But there's one signature missing. Isn't there?" Then came the performance I'd expected. First, he tried charm. "Mom, you know how much I love you. This whole thing with moving out, it was just... I was stressed, not thinking clearly." When that didn't work, he shifted to anger. "After everything I've done for you, I gave you that guest house. I was taking care of you financially." "You mean after everything you've done to me?" I replied. "Like calling me an embarrassment? Like threatening to have security remove me from your property? Like banishing me because I didn't fit your image?" Each accusation hit him like a physical blow, and I watched him cycle through denial, justification, and finally, raw desperation. "Mom, please," he whispered, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "The deadline is Friday at 5 p.m. If we don't close this deal, I lose everything. Not just the money, my reputation, my credibility, my future in this industry. Megatech will walk away and word will spread that I can't deliver on my promises." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the successful businessman who had dismissed me, but the scared young man who had forgotten where he came from and who had gotten him there. "I know exactly what's at stake, Alex," I said quietly. "The question is, what are you willing to do to earn my signature?" Alex collapsed back onto the couch, his head in his hands, and for several minutes the only sound in Ruth's living room was his ragged breathing. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, and I realized he was on the verge of tears, something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Money? A bigger house? Just tell me what it will take, and I'll make it happen." But I could see in his eyes that he already knew money wasn't going to solve this problem. This wasn't about financial compensation. This was about respect, dignity, and 25 years of sacrificed dreams. "Alex," I said, leaning forward in my chair, "you have until Friday at 5 p.m. to give me a reason why I should help the man who threw his mother out like yesterday's trash. Not a financial reason. I'm not interested in your money. A human reason. A reason that shows me you remember who you used to be and who helped you become who you are." I stood up, indicating that our conversation was over. "You know Ruth's address. When you're ready to have a real conversation about how we got to this point and what kind of man you want to be going forward, you can come back. But Alex?" I paused at the doorway. "Next time, don't come as Alexander the CEO. Come as my son who's finally ready to remember where he came from." I showed him to the door and watched through the window as he sat in his Tesla for 10 minutes, staring at Ruth's modest house, probably calculating for the first time in years what he stood to lose if the woman he'd discarded decided she'd had enough of his arrogance. Alex returned Thursday evening, 24 hours before the deadline. This time, he didn't ring the doorbell immediately. Ruth told me later that he sat in his car for nearly 30 minutes, gathering courage for a conversation that would determine his entire future. When he finally knocked, he was carrying a manila folder and wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, clothes I recognized from before his transformation into Alexander. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "I've spent the last day thinking about everything you said, and you're right. I forgot who I was, and worse, I forgot who you are and what you've sacrificed for me." His voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking slightly as he held that folder. "I can't undo the way I treated you, but I want to try to make it right." What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in months. Eleanor Martinez, my attorney, had prepared a comprehensive agreement, but Alex had prepared something more important, a genuine reckoning with his behavior. "I want to establish a $10 million trust in your name," he began, "managed entirely by trustees of your choosing, not mine. Complete financial independence so you never have to depend on anyone again." But I had learned that this was about more than financial security. "Alex, I don't just want your money. I want your commitment to the values I raised you with. That's when the real negotiation began. For every dollar in the trust, there would be a matching donation to the Single Parents in Tech Foundation, a charity supporting people like I had been, working multiple jobs to fund their children's education in technology fields. Eleanor had insisted on what she called behavioral clauses. Alex would publicly acknowledge his treatment of me and apologize. Not a corporate speak apology crafted by PR professionals, but a genuine, specific acknowledgement of how he had betrayed the woman who sacrificed everything for his success. The apology would be published in the same tech magazines that had celebrated his sale, ensuring his professional community understood the cost of his arrogance. But perhaps most importantly, the agreement established ongoing obligations. Alex would visit me every Sunday for dinner, not as a burden or obligation, but as a commitment to maintaining the relationship he had nearly destroyed. He would participate in speaking events about the importance of remembering your roots as you achieve success. He would mentor young entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds, sharing not just his technical expertise but the human cost of forgetting where you come from. When Alex signed the documents Friday afternoon, with 3 hours to spare before the Megatech deadline, his hands were steady for the first time all week. "Thank you, Mom," he said, and for the first time in months, when he called me Mom, it sounded like he meant it. Not just for signing, but for reminding me who I'm supposed to be. The ripple effects of our confrontation extended far beyond the signed contracts. Chloe Ashworth, who had been planning their engagement party for the following month, took one look at the public apology Alex published and made a swift calculation. The humbled tech entrepreneur who publicly acknowledged being wrong about his own mother wasn't the same status symbol she had been grooming to marry. She ended their relationship via text message, a fitting end to a relationship built on image rather than substance. "I'm not interested in being associated with someone who airs their family drama publicly," she wrote. Alex showed me the message, and I saw relief in his eyes rather than heartbreak. "I think I knew she wasn't the right person," he admitted. "I just got caught up in the idea of who I thought I should be with." Alex's business associates reacted in ways that revealed their true characters. Some respected his honesty and vulnerability, seeing strength in his willingness to admit he'd been wrong. Others, particularly those who had encouraged his transformation into Alexander, distanced themselves quietly. The networking dinners and exclusive gatherings became less frequent, but Alex seemed relieved rather than disappointed. "I realized I was performing for people I didn't even like," he told me during one of our Sunday dinners. "The whole Alexander persona was exhausting. I was trying so hard to be someone I thought deserved success that I forgot the person who had actually earned it." The Megatech deal closed successfully, but Alex's priorities had fundamentally shifted. Success without integrity, he was learning, was just expensive emptiness. I bought a small house 3 blocks from the ocean in Seaside Heights, close enough to hear the waves from my bedroom window, but modest enough that it felt like home rather than a showcase. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial security without the anxiety that had defined decades of paycheck-to-paycheck living. But more importantly, I had something I'd never really possessed before: complete autonomy over my own life. At 62, I discovered I had artistic abilities I'd never explored. The watercolor painting classes at the community center became the highlight of my week. My instructor, Patricia, was amazed at how quickly I picked up color theory and composition. "You have an eye for this, Helen," she said after I completed my first seascape. "Have you ever painted before?" I hadn't, but I was learning that there were entire parts of myself I'd never had the time or space to explore when survival was my full-time job. The house became my sanctuary, not a guest house where I existed at someone else's pleasure, but my own space where every choice, from the color of the kitchen walls to the books on my shelves, reflected my preferences rather than someone else's tolerance. I planted a small garden, learned to cook meals I actually enjoyed rather than whatever was cheapest, and for the first time in my life introduced myself to new people as Helen rather than Alex's mother. Alex's Sunday visits became the foundation for rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. He came not out of obligation, but because he genuinely enjoyed spending time with the woman I was becoming. We talked about his work, but also about my painting, about books we'd both read, about current events and future plans. I was no longer just his grateful mother. I was Helen, a woman with her own opinions, interests, and dreams that had nothing to do with his success or failure. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Don't ever let anyone, not even your own children, make you feel worthless. I spent weeks believing Alex when he called me an embarrassment, accepting his judgment that I didn't belong in his successful world. But the truth is, I had belonged in his world all along. I had built his world, sacrifice by sacrifice, dream by dream. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most power. The single mother working 2 jobs might be raising the next tech mogul. The elderly parent who seems out of touch might possess wisdom that could save a fortune. The person others dismiss as irrelevant might hold the keys to everything. But here's the crucial part. You have to be brave enough to use that power when the moment comes. I could have signed those papers immediately, grateful for any crumb of attention from the son who had discarded me. Instead, I chose to demand the respect I had always deserved. It wasn't about revenge, it was about remembering my own worth and insisting that others remember it too. Family relationships, like all relationships, require mutual respect. Love without respect is just emotional dependency, and I had spent too many years accepting the latter while calling it the former. Your story might be different from mine, but I guarantee you have more power than you realize. Maybe it's knowledge someone needs, maybe it's a skill they've overlooked, maybe it's simply the moral authority that comes from having lived with integrity when others chose shortcuts. Whatever it is, don't be afraid to use it when someone tries to make you invisible. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed or undervalued by people who should have treasured you, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like mine out there. Stories of people who found their strength when everything seemed lost, who discovered their worth when others tried to diminish it, who chose dignity over convenience. Share your own story in the comments below. Tell us about a time when you stood up for yourself, when you refused to accept someone else's low opinion of your worth, when you discovered power you didn't know you possessed. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that they're not alone in feeling overlooked, and that being overlooked might just be their greatest advantage. I'm Helen Walsh, the woman with the golden share in her own life. And after 62 years of putting everyone else first, I'm finally learning to put myself first. It's never too late to remember who you are and what you're worth. Trust me on that.